Well, welcome everyone to our very first MI Colloquium of the fall 2023 season. And we've got a great colloquium planned for you tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you a little bit about what we found out. Our topic for the day is found in translation, the importance of publishing and translating international youth literature for American readers. And hopefully you guys got the reference to Lost in Translation. So here's our agenda for the evening. Well, actually, first of all, again, the video of this, if you're here, it's not necessarily the most important information, but do know that there is a video of this and you can go back and rewatch it. It is available on the MI Colloquial playlist on the RUCOM Info YouTube channel. Audience members, I would ask you to stay muted throughout the presentation, but do participate in chat. We like a lively chat. I'll be monitoring that also for some of your questions during Q&A. And again, do put your questions in the chat for our Q&A. So here's what we have on tap. Well, I'm doing the welcome right now. Again, my name is Connie Pascal, I think I mentioned before, and I'm the instructor for the MI Colloquium course here at Rutgers. I'm going to throw this over to Dr. Aronson here in a moment, and he's going to frame our discussion. Then we're going to hear from Angus and Claudia, our two wonderful guest speakers. After that, they're going to be engaged in a panel discussion between the three of them, and then we're going to open it up to the audience, and we'll wrap up with some closing remarks. So with that, I'd like to toss it to Dr. Mark Aronson.
Thank you very much. And I'll tell you a little bit about me and Rutgers, but I first wanted to introduce our two wonderful guests. Say hi, Claudia, Angus.
Hello.
And then let me tell you a little bit about each of them and then what we're doing. So Claudia Zobedrick is an award-winning publisher and translator who runs Enchanted Lion Books, which is an independent press in Brooklyn, New York, with a focus on publishing beautiful picture books and children's fiction in translation, though there's more beyond that, and we will soon learn about that. Enchanted Lion Books have been awarded the Batchelder Prize, which, as I'm sure you all know, is ALSC's prize for translated books up through age 14. The prize is actually given to the publisher. She's received it 5 times, as well as many honor books. And some of those books that Enchanted Lion and Claudia have published have been real favorites amongst students of mine over the years, including Cry Heart But Never Break and the wonderful Fluffy Little Squishy. Both books have been much discussed in my classes. She brings to us both the practical understanding of a publisher and translator and the wide perspective of a person whose view is truly global. I just learned today that we share the experience of essentially growing up at the Donnell Library, which was a true marvel directly across the street from the Museum of Modern Art. Angus Ewan Killick, whom I've also known for many years, worked at a series of ever larger jobs and key publishing firms, including DK, Penguin, Disney, and Macmillan. He truly knows books for children, but he has also lived in Italy and literally embodies an international perspective on writing, illustrating, and translating books for young people. So that's whom we have here as our special guests who can really give us insight into the world of bringing books for young people, for teenagers, and even beyond that, from around the world to people here in America. So we're very lucky here at Rutgers to be able to treat international youth literature as an integral part of our Master's in Library Science program. I get to host a series of experts from around the world every spring for students taking the International Youth Literature class, and COVID willing, we get to go to Bologna for the Children's Book Fair, where we get to see on display books from many, many, many parts of the world and listen to panels and see illustrators and really have our eyes opened to what a children's book can be. We are also being able to create now at Alexander Library our own international youth literature collection. And I have to thank Doris Gable, who's been instrumental in helping to create that. And that means that anybody who comes to Alexander can browse among the over 1,000 books there, can take them out. And so if you're a librarian or a teacher or a student who wants to look at books that are in other languages or from other countries and to expand your world, you will be able to do it right now at Alexander Library. We are going to share the LibGuide that we've created that includes access to our catalog of the books, map of the world of where we have books from, and even samples of people reading from some of those books. So you get to hear books in many languages. So international youth literature, in my view, is a strange creature. It is by definition at the heart of what we all are talking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's international, yet it often disappears when we focus on that issue. So that's one subject to talk about. But I've also been hearing from a lot of my students that you work in communities where there are people who either themselves or their parents or their grandparents speak other languages or come from other countries or feel a strong connection to cultures from other countries. There are also parents who are very eager for their children to be world citizens, to be aware of how people think and live in other lands. We're also all aware that the major issues of our time, climate change, gender issues, race issues, political issues, run all around the globe, are not confined to any one set of borders built over time. And so looking at how people elsewhere examine those issues, and certainly issues like refugees and immigration, all of that links us to ourselves magnified by the whole world. And so there's such richness available to us. And finally, authors and illustrators and designers in other countries simply may try something that isn't tried here. They may simply experiment in ways that is different from how we tend to experiment. One of the most interesting experiences for me when I go to Bologna is there's a bookstore where they sell the books from examples of some of the books from all of the countries. And I'm so struck by how the American books are so realistic in a kind of very confining way, as opposed to other countries who may have, or artists who may have a much more imaginative sense of what it may be to be within a child's universe. And so that is available to us as we look at books from other lands, simply other ways of envisioning and depicting experiences linked to childhood or middle grade or YA or even beyond. So that's what the broad thinking about why we do this and what we're doing. So Claudia and Angus and people like them go out and find these gems. They find these books created elsewhere or by people from elsewhere, and they find people, or they themselves will translate the books if that's what is involved, and then they bring them to us. They find ways to get them published, get them to our attention, get us to see them, get them out in the world. And so that's sort of the frame of what we're doing today or thinking about today. So let's begin with opportunities. We can also talk about challenges. So I'm going to ask each of you, Claudia and Angus, what can books from elsewhere offer that you may think is often not seen or may not be seen in books found here? Do you want, if you want to give an example of a particular book or author or experience, let's start with the question of distinct. What can perhaps be found in such works?
Should I begin? You want to
Please.
begin?
Please.
I don't mind.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm not going to use a specific example. I would just speak in general that what you find when you look at books from around the world are experiences perceived and experienced in vastly different ways. You find different narrative modes. So stories are in fact told often in a very different style from the sort of three-point narrative, a beginning, middle, and end of an American story. The books are often more open-ended. They leave more questions hanging in the air as opposed to giving answers. The aesthetic styles are different, and they represent different kind of cultural, spiritual, political, etc. understandings of what it is to be a child, what childhood is, what it is to live within the imagination, what it is to be a refugee, what it is to die. I mean, honestly, on every single front, you're confronted by difference, and difference that is instrumental, I think, to really understanding a lot of what it is to be a human being in the world today. And so to close off these perspectives is to close off a vast amount of points of view. It's really like a diversity of viewpoint and experience that if we don't have access to, we're going to be narrow.
Very well said, Angus.
Beautifully said. Very hard to add much to that, except, you know, we talk about mirrors and windows, and picture books of all kinds from all different places provide the opportunity to see the world through someone else's eyes. And also, it's not, when you appreciate, you know, any piece of literature, it's as much about what you bring to the conversation yourself as what the book is bringing to you. So I think that you know, when you evaluate or read or experience a book from another place, you are meeting. It's a meeting place. It's a point where you can meet and create something. A lot of authors say that they only deliver 50% of the experience, and the other 50% comes from the reader. And so I think you know, books from other places are bringing a perspective. And you're seeing things through other people's eyes, and you're meeting them and shaking hands and making an experience. And it's very intimate and personal. And you walk away with hopefully having learned something, and maybe it's given something to you that you take with you.
So we've talked about difference. That brings up the question then, you know, the term that's often used, I think overused, but very frequently used today as a positive about a book is that it's, quote, relatable. And what is sometimes expressed as a hesitation about books that may be distinct and different in all the ways that you've outlined is, will they be relatable to some hypothesized American reader, which of course is based not on any complex survey of readers. But how do you respond to that question of books that and being relatable?
Do you want me to answer, or you want to go first this time?
I mean, I'm happy to go first. I mean, it so much depends upon the book, doesn't it? Some books are instantly relatable. Some books feel more you feel more comfortable when you start reading them, and other books, you know, you start raising questions and wondering what's going on here, and it sparks curiosity. And curiosity is the pathway to understanding and relating to something. So I just feel like it's hard to say international books are one thing, because they're not. I have a very Catholic sensibility. I have a fairly commercial sensibility. A lot of my books, I try to work very hard to make them relatable. And sometimes I change them in the translation and the adaptation from the foreign edition to make them more relatable to an audience in English, or the audience in North America that I'm appealing to. I have to sell books, of course. So I want to make them welcoming. And so I think my approach editorially is different from yours, Claudia. Our lists are about curation, and we curate our lists very differently. And that's why we are such good friends, because we publish very different types of books. And so I feel that my approach is to make those books slip a little bit easier into the marketplace here and be very relatable. I'm not saying that Claudia's books are not relatable, they are, but she has a different approach to art style. And we discussed this the very first time we sat down together when I started this. There's room for everyone, quite frankly. In fact, the really interesting thing that I've learned since I started on this journey is how much incredible literature there is out there in other countries around the world that's never been published or given exposure to the English-speaking marketplace. And it's absolutely jaw-dropping. And I don't know about you, Claudia, but I'm inundated with people pitching projects to me all the time. And I'm even, one of the books that I published early this year is actually 25 years old. And it just is shocking to me that this book, actually, I'll just show it to you.
Please.
The Most Important Thing, which is
yes.
from Italy, and it was published in 1998. Does that make it 25 years old? Something like that, yes. And it got a UNESCO citation for peace and tolerance. And it's got this wonderful classic art. It's very, very inviting and relatable and approachable. And it's just a simple story about animals all meeting in the forest and discussing what the most important thing is. And so, just to very quickly show you a couple of spreads. So for example, the giraffe says it's to have a long neck. And so all the animals try out what it's like to have long necks. And you go through the book and you meet the different animals. So the bird here wants to have wings. Wings is the most important thing, and all the animals have wings. And then you get towards the end of the book after you've met all the animals, and let's see, and the owl says, perhaps all of these things are important. And so the animals try everything all at once. And the owl says, no, 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 no. Not all together, not all at once. Each one of us has something unique and important. And finally, they all agreed. I mean, what a beautiful message about accepting others' differences, embracing, who we are. Yeah, special book, but 25 years old, never been published in English. I couldn't believe it.
I think one thing that strikes me about that book is just the formatting, the way they use the fold over page. It's just not a standard formatting. And so aside from everything else, you're exposed to a different way to design and narrate. So Claudia, since we've been told that you and Angus are going to ferociously clash, we might have...
No. We're unbelievally compatible.
Oh, that's right. It's important to have difference. I forgot. I just
right. It's peace and harmony, Mark. It's peace and harmony.
Got it.
Can I jump in here just real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
So just for perspective, how big is the English speaking book market in youth literature in comparison to the rest of the world? Is it vital that these authors get exposure to the English market to make it, per se?
No, that you can sell in France and be, it depends.
No, I mean, many of these creators are making it just fine in their own country. I mean, they don't, a French picture book doesn't need a US pickup to be successful.
Yeah.
No.
So thank you for that. And then we've got some really interesting stuff happening in the chat. So welcome all you interesting people. And
Right. So Claudia.
yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. To answer the question, yes, Angus and I do have a different perspective on this. I mean, I come to publishing having been in the nonprofit world, having been in academia, and not having had the incredible life in publishing that Angus had. So I don't have all of the, all of the awareness that I might from working at the bigger houses, really understanding the mainstream. So I kind of come in a little bit more raw, but I mean, my sense on relatable is that that's something that doesn't really pertain to the kids. Like that's an adult point of view. When you're trying to make something relatable, you're trying to reach the adult gatekeepers. You're trying to reach the parents and the caretakers, the teachers and the librarians, because as adults, we lose our curiosity and we narrow and we have strong, biases and convictions, and we're just not that open. And if you're talking about a 5-year-old kid, they've been on planet Earth for 60 months. That's it. They're here for 60 months and they're open. They're a channel. They're just incredibly curious. And they're not thinking like, is this relatable to me? Is this what I'm used to? They're not used to anything. It's all new. It's all totally brand new. And their curiosity is like wide-eyed and awake. And so really it's always the adults who are trying to like weigh and measure, and like they're the only ones with an idea of something being foreign. Because if you've been on planet Earth for 60 months or 72 months, like everything's foreign or nothing's foreign or everything's new, or right. It's a whole different framework. And so I think, I think our job as adults is to even interrogate ourselves as to something having to be relatable. Like, what do we think children are, and what do we think we're giving them that we have to give them something that's somehow in some comfort zone that they don't even have established by age 5 or 6?
So I would add to that even older, Katie Horning, who worked at CCBC for many years, that's where those numbers about publishing and diversity come from. And it's in Wisconsin, and she tells a story about a tiny school in Wisconsin, and the students there demanded a course in Japanese. Why? Because they were so in love with manga that they wanted to be able to read Japanese. So, the point, the students are open. It would be the adults who were saying, oh, kids, Japanese, come on, why would we want that? And I should also, we have very little time, but I have to tell you, a scientist I know explained that the way predators find their prey in the animal world is they have a search image. They have an image of what prey will look like. So they don't look at everything. They just look for things that look like that. And his whole point is that we need to get past our search images and to be able to see past what we expect to find. And that's what allows us to make new discoveries, recognizing what your search image is. So I wanted to ask, since both of you are involved in translation, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, obviously languages have their own rhythms, and rhythm and rhyme can be very important, especially in younger books. So how do you deal with that problem of something that's been written within the rhythmic structure of a language that is now going to enter a different rhythmic structure? And since especially English is sort of half Latinate and half Danish, how do you bring things that come from, let's say, Latinate languages like Italian or French or Spanish that will have a very different cadence? So I'd be interested from both of you.
I mean, Angus, I think you have examples and so on. I'm not going to share specific examples, so I'll just speak more briefly. But I mean, not every translation is primarily about cadence, of course. So, I mean, right, sometimes sound is primary. And certainly if you're translating poetry, the music of it is going to be your major concern. But sometimes, like in The Wonderful Fluffy Little Squishy, I mean, that's, yes, you want the rhythm of the story to be there, but you're really trying to convey the child voice, and you're really trying to convey her experiences in a way that feels natural, belongs to her age and her consciousness as the kind of child she is. And so you're searching out a vocabulary and an expression that's not simply about the music. You know, so I think you really, and then sometimes you have just more abstract works where you're really grappling with ideas, and you have to be very, very careful as to how you render those ideas, and the music is really secondary. And if you can achieve it, great, but the spirit of the translation is going to be captured through the ideas themselves and not sonic, like sonorously or through the sound. So I would say you just like, it depends on the book. It depends on whether it's poetry or fiction or something a little bit more philosophical, abstract as to what you're honing in on.
So Angus.
Yeah, so actually, Claudia was referring a little bit to something I'd mentioned earlier when we were talking, which is this book, Imagine, from Bruno Tognolini. So Bruno Tognolini is probably the best known living children's poet in Italy today. He's written over 60 books, and he also has had TV shows and radio shows, and generations of children have grown up knowing this poet. He writes in rhyme and with rhythm, and of course rhyming in Italian is ever so easy because all the words end in only 4 letters. And translating into English is extremely challenging. So the trick here is to find the right translator, or in this case, it ended up being a team. But first, Bruno had never allowed anyone to try and translate his works because he really felt that it would never work. His poetry would not work. So I found this translator, Denise Muir, who actually knows him. And I had her reach out to him and ask him if he would let us try. And we laid out a whole process in front of him of how we were going to do this. And what's interesting about Denise is the way she works, and she is a poet and a writer herself, so that helps. She's also a teacher, so she will do a draft of a translation of some stanzas, and then she will take it into the classroom and work on it with her students to get their response and see how they feel about what she's reading to them. And then she also has a friend, an editorial friend in Boston, who she also consults, and she consulted me a lot during the process. And we worked very hard on, I think it's 24 stanzas in this book, and we tried our best to maintain the rhythm, the musicality of what it is like to have it in English and what it is like to read it, what it's like to read it in Italian and what it is like to read it in English. I feel very confident that we did a good job. But what is really wonderful is Denise, when we finished the translation that we thought we were happy with it, she read it and then sent a reading of her to Bruno to listen to. He understands English. He doesn't speak it much, but he understands it. And she has the most beautiful musical Scottish accent. She lives in Edinburgh, and I think she just totally won him over. He was just blown away by it.
So that's really a book that we'll all look forward to. A really interesting story. We don't have too much time before questions start, so I just wanted Claudia to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the unruly side of your publishing, since it's an expansion, an extension. I don't think it's related to Putin's expansion of Russia, but tell us about the unruly side of your publishing.
Sure, thank you, Mark. In 2020, I think it was the fall of 2020. I don't know why, sort of like deep in COVID, we decided it was a good idea to launch a new imprint. And our imprint is called Unruly. which is an imprint of picture books for YA and adult readers. So what we're making the case for is the picture book as a medium, as opposed to an age group. And the premise being that readers of all ages can derive a great deal from narrative illustrated works that use the unique space of the picture book, in which there are two simultaneous narratives, the written narrative and the visual narrative, working to create a kind of richer experience of the text and of the possibilities of its meaning through sharing illustration. Our first book, which I think we have, Mark, do I have time to share my screen
Please.
really briefly?
Yes, you do, absolutely.
Okay. I think maybe now I can. Yes.
You had it, yes, it came for a second and then
That was somebody else.
That was
Yeah, that was you, Connie. This is not an unruly book. This is a book in translation, but a book we created with an Argentine artist and author. So it's not, in fact, it's in translation, but an original book. But the book I wanted to show you, our very first unruly book, is here. So basically, we worked with Ana Cristina Herreras and Violeta Lopez on a retelling of an old Spanish folk tale. And what Ana Cristina did, she's a folklorist, and she went back to the original version of the tale, which is the not Disneyfied one. And so it's a kind of raw, just like the Grimms, it's raw, sort of more brutal, more honest story. And Violeta then ran with the implications of the story, which ended up being quite feminist, about how women end up being violated and how they claim their space and how they achieve their identity. And so this shows the kind of progression of different illustration styles. This was the final illustration style. And it has a final coda where the mouse and the cat of the folktale become a female artist. And that final silent coda really helps to tell the story of the experience of the female protagonist coming out of the folktale. So it's very abstract, it's very complex, and there's nothing in terms of the subject matter or how the story is told that is for children. It wasn't created for children. It wasn't ever conceived of for children. And yet it's a really powerful medium because of the art for sharing a story, which doesn't come down to a kind of black and white sort of tale about female experience, but is far more nuanced and far more complex because of the art. And then this is a brief little preview of our next unruly book, which is it's a story of the history of violence against children by one of Mexico's great authors for children. He's also an adult author in his own right, and participated in it's called the crack movement in Mexico. And he felt that, which is for adults, so he's writing for adults and kids. And he felt that as an author for kids who was thinking about kids and has created something like 80 books for children, that he wanted to tell this story, which really excavates and showcases a really brutal and unending history of harm done to children. So I will stop sharing my screen here.
So I think we are going to go to questions. I just had to show something when you were talking, Claudia. So I happen to have on my shelves, courtesy of my father. This is a 1930 wordless picture book for adults, published by Farrar and Reinhardt. And that the use, I know David Wiesner is writing about this, but the use of images to communicate to all ages in print is really something growing and should be, and has real vast potential. So Connie, you said there were some questions.
We do. We have a couple questions, and I'd like to invite other people to jump in and ask questions. The first one is from Adam. And this was actually came a little bit earlier when we were talking about books in non-standard format. And he wondered how hard it is to get that published. So that's one
I
way.
mean, I would say, I'm sure Angus can add in,
Mm.
and Claudia, I think it really depends. I mean, A, if you're David Wiesner, or B, if you have just a great book that demands a non-standard iteration, it can happen. But, you know, it's an extra expense for a publisher, and a publisher is like in any other aspect is going to weigh against expense against benefit. Claudia published, how many years ago you did that book with the cutouts, the white pages, Claudia, with the cutouts?
Forest, yeah,
Yeah.
the forest, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, I don't remember.
But, you know, if a book demands it, yeah, go
Yeah.
on.
So I was just going to show The Secret of the Magic Pearl, which is a 96-page picture book, but it's for 8 to 12-year-olds. So it actually, although it has fantastic illustrations by Jacopo Bruno, it has a lot of text as well. It has 8,000 words in the storytelling. So in a sense, it's a picture book for older readers. And when it was published in this format in Italian, and when we got the book, we really were just thinking, what do we do to accommodate for the fact that booksellers and gatekeepers in the US may not know what to do with this book because it's longer form, but heavily illustrated. And we decided we just got to go ahead and publish it in this format, at least in hardcover, and hope that it finds a place on the shelves. And certainly it's done very well for us, so we're very happy. But finding a comp for this book was really difficult, and all the salespeople in the publishing houses want to know, well, what is it like? What other book is it like? And it was very challenging to say, oh, it's like that, because there were very few books for that
I
age
just have
group
to
like
tell a
this.
story about that. When I started out kids book, I was working for Charlotte Zolotow, etc. To say that a book was like another book was anathema. It was a failure if it was like another book. You know, it was, your book had to not be like another book.
Right. I mean, the whole point being here is you cite another book that sold really well, and they're like, oh, well, then the same reader is going to want your book too.
Right.
So it's going to sell well too. But I completely agree with you. I mean, it is anathema. It's like, you know, no, this is actually a unique book.
So yes, Connie, another question.
Well, I'm going to just kind of ask Anna Wells if she would like to consider coming on camera and why she's thinking about that. And you don't have to, Anna. I do have your question. I actually have a question for you guys, which is, so as an American reader, I want that beginning, middle, and end that you guys talked about at the very beginning. So how, as a reader, how do I guess, train my brain to not expect or want that kind of?
First of all, I don't accept that you're using a very broad definition of American. There are a lot of different Americans who have different expectations.
For me as a reader, how about that?
Okay. That's...
I have to say that I am drawn to storytelling that has, that arc to it. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I can think of a book that doesn't give you a satisfying ending that I have published. But, I totally accept some of the comments that Claudia just said about the storytelling that comes from other countries often does not follow a standard format or narrative arc, and leaves you with more questions than you started with at the beginning. And that's a fabulous way to get people thinking about a topic.
And also we're used to movies that are like that. I mean, not everything is always wrapped up or clear. Mm-hmm. We're used to that in other media, plays.
I mean, yeah, I also think that, I mean, all of us are working in the service of children, and we're working in the service of their imaginations and their curiosity, and there has to be some sensitivity towards all of that. We're not really meant to just be publishing or shepherding into classrooms as teachers or librarians, the books that satisfy only ourselves. I mean, I think there's a larger project here. And I mean, something that's open-ended is not necessarily unsatisfying. It's not that it doesn't, it's not that it doesn't deliver actually. You can have some sense of closure of certain things, and there can be an integrity to the relationships, and there can be a pattern to the story that is very satisfying. But that pattern doesn't tie everything kind of neatly up into a bow the way like a Disney movie or like a lot of typical fare here might. So I think it's also just allowing some of those things to exist as what they are and not bringing so many expectations to them, and not thinking, I mean, maybe just not even worrying about it, just kind of like diving in and seeing what it does. Because I think a lot of the books from other countries are deeply satisfying. They just might be satisfying in a different way. The patterning might be different.
Historians argue that the three-part structure in books is a product of medieval obsession with trinities, and they point out that other cultures that are not Trinitarian do not necessarily have that dependence, and it's a specific heritage. But anyway, there was Connie, you were mentioning
yes, actually Anna Wells has a question. Go ahead, Anna, ask your question or give your point of view.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me now?
We can, Anna.
You might even see me. Okay. So originally came here from Russia, and during my youth and even older, I used to read some foreign literature, and I enjoy it a lot. When I started to work here in the library, in the public library, I noticed that there are not that many books that I used to read back there were translated here, even like modern authors, like Norwegian authors that I love to read too. So I just wonder what's going on, and could it be like changed somehow? Or yeah, I think it's most of my questions.
So basically what's going on in the US publishing industry?
Yeah, that's
I mean, there's a small group of publishing houses like ours where we are trying to sniff out, literature, not just from the front list from publishers who are pressing those books upon us today, but also looking at books from the backlist. I mean, the Gianni Rodari project that Claudia is working on is a great example of that. I just, I've made a reference to the fact that there is just a massive amount of literature out there, and there's not that many of us, focusing in on this project, on bringing those books into translation. So I feel like, as far as I'm concerned, there's an inexhaustive amount of material for us to explore. And what holds us back is the fact that we don't have, massively deep pockets to publish, huge lists. And also, I want to be connected to each and every book that I publish. And so I really want my list to be small, because I've worked at big houses where, where it's more of a machine and you're churning out, large quantities of middle grade and what have you, and hoping that something sticks. This is more mission-driven publishing, and that's really what excites me. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I also think that I mean, just to say that I think the numbers are going up. I was just at a translation conference in DC on Friday, and I mean, I think across all of the small presses in this country, that translated literature for adults is surely increasing. And it also has to do, I think, with us having such a big book market here. I lived in France for a couple of years, where they do have a smaller book market, and it was impressive how much was available in French in translation. I mean, from all of the Eastern European countries, just like massive amounts of books from all of those countries. And it was astonishing, because there wasn't just like one or two Albanian novels, there were many. you know, and I, you know, it's just that we have so much produced here that it's a bit of a different publishing model, I think, but the numbers are going up. They could
Well, I
be
would like
better.
to here then make a pitch to all of you who are here attending. You are in a position as librarians, as teachers, as book readers, to be apostles, to be advocates, to seek out books from other countries. Please use our library to familiarize yourself with books that you may not have heard of, or authors or illustrators. And then one crucially important thing is to think about how to build programming around those books. Because if you're using books where there isn't a big name recognition, everybody isn't all rushing to see the movie, how are you going to share those materials to open eyes, to open interest, to make connections? So all of you are in a position to be influential. And look, when I started in publishing, the YA area was near Clifford the Big Red Dog because B&N thought it was such a minor part of publishing. And once people started buying YAs, they moved it into the center of the stores. So the more we promote and share international literature, the more others will pay attention, the more books will become available. It's a bit of grassroots organizing.
But honestly, I tried to promote some books, but I can't see any interest.
I've seen, it depends where you are and how
Yeah.
you promote. I definitely do see, I think I agree with Claudia that my impression is that things are improving. They're not improving in a tsunami, but there is a general, and also think about it this way, how many pre-COVID, how many families were sending their kids for year abroad, study abroad, learn Mandarin, whatever. It was such a sense that America had to be part of the world. Well, why not begin that as a child, with seeing the world, with being open to the world? And I do think people have some sense that there's not all people were divided or about this, but that we need to be open to the world.
Oh, that's true. But thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you, Anne. That's very nice. So any specific advice for our librarians in the room about how to add to their collection? Are there other things? I mean, we do have some recommended resources that we can share.
Well, I would certainly say look at publishers like the two here today, get to know their lists. Then there are other resources, like there's an IBI list that there's a USBBY list. There are lists that we share that are part of our LibGuide that will allow you as librarians to quickly see a lot of books that have been noticed, that have been selected. I'm suddenly forgetting something, so please someone else.
Well, I was going to say, you know, I gave you the link to World Kidlit, which I think is a fantastic website, and you can join their newsletter, and they send out the newsletter. And actually, we've just come off World Kidlit month, and every day they were featuring different books from different countries, and I think that's just a fantastic way to connect into this canon of literature. And actually, we were gonna do a call to action, and World Kidlit Month does this amazing thing called the bingo game. And basically it's 5 squares by 5 squares, and on each square there's a challenge. So, you know, read a picture book translated from another language, read a Batchelder Award winner, read a book from Africa. And so you have to work your way across to make your bingo. And I think it's a really fun way to expand your horizons in reading of international literature.
So we have another question. Annette Goldsmith, would you like to answer?
Oh, hi, Annette.
Hello, Annette.
Hi, everybody.
Your own entity, Annette. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yeah. Whoops. I just lost the chat. Just a second.
We can hear you.
Do you want me to
Where
ask?
is it? Okay. So I just wanted to ask where you kind of situate yourself on the translation continuum, where, you know, on one end you have the kind of traditional invisible hand of the translator, and the translation is very smooth. And on the other hand, on the other end, you have a translation that seems less smooth, but it may give you a better sense of the original. Maybe it includes more of the original language. Maybe it's a little bit rougher or more disruptive. I realize this may change simply from book to book, but can you talk about that?
I mean, that was going to be my answer, that it depends on the project. It really does. It ranges from one far end where you are really working hard and almost rewriting sometimes, to the other end of the scale where you are being as faithful as you possibly can to the original language, to bring that language, you know, in translation to the audience as closely as possible to what it was originally. And I think you have to think of the reader, you know, most of the time, you know, how they're going to experience the language that you're translating. Claudia, do you?
Thanks, Angus.
We can't hear you, Claudia.
Oh, you're on mute. There you
All
go.
right. I think it goes book by book, and it also connects to what we're trying to achieve. You know, for example, we did a couple of books from Norway's great children's poet Inger Hagerup a few years ago, and the translator lived in Norway, knows Norwegian, knows the culture, and knows what it felt like to have those poems in her mouth, like the feel of the words in the mouth, and that was really important to her, and sort of how they tumble out of the mouth and go into expression. And so in the course of working through the translation, quite a few of the words changed, like vegetables changed, and rivers and streams, and kind of like some of the physical environment would shift a little bit, because she was more concerned about finding the words that really tumbled out of the mouth and felt a certain way and carried the rhythm, rather than just saying a bench, a park, a leek, or whatever the vegetable was, you know. And so a certain amount of replacement happened so that we could focus in on the rhythm and the feeling of saying it. So that's a very different decision-making process than with another book where, you know, our aims may be completely different. And what we're really trying to do is to, again, like either capture the child voice in the most natural way. So for it to be natural and not awkward in English, maybe you have to make some adaptations. I mean, I think this opens up into the big conversation as to like what makes a good translation, what actually is a translation, and what makes a good translation. But I think it's important for everybody here to understand that it's time for us to give up on that outdated notion that somehow every translation is some tarnished copy, you know, that you're never really getting the real good original thing, because literature's always been global, from Shakespeare to Don Quixote to, I mean, it's always been a global literature. And from the Bible itself, right, we're going in and out of languages, and what we get in translation is real and beautiful and strong. So we just need to get rid of that idea that somehow like the original language is the true thing and translation is never adding up, because that's just not true at all.
We're going to need closing remarks, but I have to tell, the two of you have convinced me of something. The translation stories that you both told are so rich and so interesting that you guys should each have a little podcast or a little story of the translation experience of your books, because it is fascinating and deep and profound and artistic. And it really can enhance our understanding as you tell those stories. So please think of including that. I know it's more work, blah, 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 but it really would be an...
That's a great idea.
Yeah,
it's a great idea.
We do it together, actually. It'll be really fun.
That would be really fun.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is in preparing for this, I started looking at some of my books and thinking, I have such rich stories about the working on each of the books. I mean, each one is different. You approach each one differently. There are different people involved. But there is, behind every book, there's a fascinating story, be it changes in the art or, you know, I was going to tell the story of a book that I've acquired that's publishing next year. And the author and the illustrator are Black, and they live in France. One of them is from Togo. And the French edition has a white girl as the protagonist. And I went back to them and I met them in France, and they are beautiful people. And I said to the illustrator, why did you do this? And she just shrugged and said, that's what they wanted me to do. And so I had her re-illustrate. I paid her to re-illustrate the book with a Black girl as the protagonist. And not only that, I put her on the cover of the book. She wasn't featured before. And it's just stories like that are just, this is one of the
You got to tell those stories. Everybody wants them.
Wonderful.
Well,
Yeah.
everyone agrees that a podcast by you two would be something they would listen to. So it's
It would be fun.
And then because you're publishers, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but what kind of submissions are you guys open to? I think we're talking. So
I mean, I have to say at this moment in time, we unfortunately have to, we are inundated, as you said, Angus, and we're, it's a rough time at the moment, and we're not particularly open to submissions right now. We're pretty well booked into like 20.
Still take the meetings, you know, I'm having pre-Frankfurt meetings right now, and I'm taking them out of politeness, but I really can't acquire much. My list is full.
Yeah, me too for now.
There are other publishers, and I think, but just the quick question I wanted to ask, we were meant to ask each of you if you had any charge to the jury, charge to the
call for action.
Oh, so that was the bingo.
Oh, your call to action was bingo.
Yeah.
And
I mean, mine was very similar without the bingo. I
Mm.
mean, I think to just challenge yourself to look at the publishers who are publishing books in translation for kids, and to look at the batch elders and the USBBY, familiarize yourself, and to also just keep in mind the fact that for a kid who's 5 to 8 years old, everything is new. I mean, when they first see a John Klassen book, or they first see any book, it's new to them. And it's and this attitude that because something is in translation, it's somehow foreign or harder than any other new book is just one more thing to interrogate, because I don't think there is anything harder about a translation than any book that's published here. And maybe it's kind of hard to think about giving a kid the same old story again and again and again, and like inducing their boredom, you know, like who wants to be visiting that on a child, you know?
Right, very good. Okay, well, I want to thank all of you guys. I'm certainly available for a little bit if anyone wants to chat after. But thank you, Connie, for hosting and letting us have this opportunity. You guys, we could talk with you guys forever. So, but we have to release you to publish books.
Well, again, thank you all very, very much for joining us today. And I will be looking forward to reading your reflections. So what Angus and Claudia don't know is that this is an assignment, and the students here have to go out and write reflections about this experience and what they learned. And having taught this class for many, many years, I can assure you these are going to be beautifully written essays. And I'll share some of those, that feedback with you.
Wonderful.
Please do. That's exciting. Yeah.
Yes, that is an assignment, Kellyanne. Okay. Anyway, lots of great stuff in the chat. If you didn't get a chance to look at it, I will share in the class. I'll share the Zoom recording so that you can also see the chat with that. And again, there will be a video of this up on our.
Connie, I tried to see the chat, but I wasn't able to. I don't know if we can as participants, but it would be interesting if we
Yeah,
could.
I'll save it. Well, one of the things that you may or may not know about Zoom is that you can save the chat. If you just go to the little the little three little dots, the breadcrumbs, and you can save chat, and then you can, and then it'll save to your computer, and then you can look at all that, because you had some people that you've actually published in the chat in there.
Really?
A lot of really great people. So once again, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but Mark has said that he'll stay on for anybody who wants to chat a little bit, and Angus and Claudia may stay on for a couple minutes.
Sure.
Good evening.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to leave too, but thank you, everyone.
Sure,
It's
sure.
been lovely to
Bye.
be here. Okay, bye.
Thanks to all of you.